Hello everyone, this is Clyde with a very helpful video, I hope, about converting a power supply, as you see here, an old Dell power supply, into something that's useful in some RGB lighting, Christmas display, or if you're doing a haunt, or if you're doing decorating for anything that you really need low voltage power for. For example, power supplies are very useful. If you look at this one here, you can see that this says, maybe I'll turn it this way and you can read it a little better. You can see that this power supply actually has a few different modes. Maximum combined power on the 5 volt and 3.5 volt is 135 watts. So that's pretty much our maximum on here. This is a 135 watt power supply. So it's pretty old. Like I said, you can see it's out of a Dell computer, and maybe it's not very useful anymore because the computer died and this is still working. But as you can see, I wrote the maximums out here. I can get 6 amps of power out of this power supply on 12 volt, or I can get 22 amps max out of the 5 volt line. And 22 amps max is a lot of power for 5 volt RGB pixels and RGB lighting. So I have a project I'm going to be doing here pretty soon, and I'm going to use this 5 volt power. I'm going to use this power supply here, and I'm going to walk you through the steps that will convert this power supply into something that can be used for RGB pixels and any low voltage lighting that you might be using. Okay, and we're back, and I wanted to show you a couple tools that I'm going to be using here, a couple items. First, I have a piece of wire. This is a 14 gauge piece of wire. I have a pair of wire cutters and strippers right here. I'm just going to take a quick cut and strip this wire so that I can make a quick connection. There we go. We've got some wire stripped. Cut that a little shorter, and we'll put that out of the way. I'm going to take this wire and bend it right in half, and first thing we're going to do is we're going to test the power supply. We're going to put power to the power supply. We have to test the power supply to make sure that it still works before we go any further. Now, in order to test the power supply, we have to do something that allows us to check to see if there's voltage that can run through it. And you'll notice all the various wires here that you see: gray, black, orange, yellow, blue. And you know what? I really don't care about any of the wires except for the red one, the yellow one, and the black. When we work with DC voltage out of a power supply, we worry about the colors of the wires because those usually tell us what voltage is going to be running through that power supply line. The ones that I use most frequently are the 5 volt and the 12 volt. The 5 volt is noted by the red, and the yellow is noted by the 12 volt. So since those are the only colors I'm worried about. Now the orange, I believe it's like a 7 or a 7 volt or a 3.5 volt, something like that. And sometimes if you look at the power supply, it even tells you right here on the label which color is what voltage. We can test for that, but in any event, we just want to get started by finding out if the power supply works. Now, I have another power supply I'll bring in over here. This is another old style power supply. It's an ATX model for a micro tower that was made probably 12 or 14 years ago, and it doesn't have very many very high maximums. I read the label, and I can get 12 amps out of the 5 volt and 1.5 amps out of the 12 volt, which isn't very powerful. So this is pretty old, but it will work in a small situation that only requires just a little bit of 5 volt power, and I have use for this. So what we're going to do is I'll line these up, and you'll notice that Dell does some things a little differently than other suppliers do, but mostly you can see here, you can see a green wire right here on this power supply on the left. This power supply on the right from Dell doesn't have the green wire. So what I did was I did some searching online, and I found out in order to test this Dell power supply, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go with the gray wire. And I'm going to jump using my wire here. I'm going to push this this power wire, this wire that I cut, right into the pin with the gray, and then I'm going to pick any black connection wire that I can, and I'm going to just slide the other wire right into it. So I'm going to jump. This is a jumper. And what this tells the power supply is, okay, the motherboard is now connected to this 20-pin adapter. And what I've done is the gray power wire is now connected to a black wire. The black denotes a ground. The gray denotes a power connection to a motherboard. So with this connection here, when we plug in the computer power supply, this, you should see a fan, somewhere there's a fan right here. This fan should start running now that we've made this connection. So I'm going to take this power supply, plug it in, and lo and behold, you might not be able to see it, but I can feel the air blowing. Now we have this multimeter that we're going to test our power supply lines to. Now, with that fan running, that tells me that we have power going into our power supply. Once again, this is an old unit. Some of the newer units are much more challenging to work with, but this is pretty simple to start with. So I'm grabbing just a inexpensive $12 multimeter I found online, and I'm going to switch it to this DC voltage 20 dot. And immediately I'm going to show a bunch of zeros on the screen. In DC voltage land, we have red and we have black. Now, red denotes the positive, black denotes the neutral, which is contrary to our black 14 gauge wire for AC electrics. In DC land, we use red as our positive. In AC land, we use black as our positive. But since we're in DC land, we're going to use red as our positive. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to grab one of these 4-pin Molex connectors that's right off of this old power supply. And you'll see we have 2 blacks, a red, and a yellow. I'm going to take the red wire, or the red pin, and plug the red pin into the red wire, and then I'm going to plug the black pin into the black wire socket. I'm going to come over here to the multimeter, and you're going to see a reading. This denotes that we have a 5.16 voltage running through this wire right now. So we have successfully converted this power supply into a working power supply that allows us to use it for RGB projects. Now I'm going to do the exact same thing, only I'm going to take the red prong and I'm going to connect it to my white or my yellow wire. I probably actually should show you this. I want to plug the black one in first into a black wire, and then I'll plug the red one into the yellow wire. This is for safety, so that you don't shock yourself, because if you plug this one in first, then there's live power going through there. And now you can see we have an 11.71 voltage running through this wire. So now I know I have a 12 volt line or an 11.7 volt line running right through here and on my yellow line, and I have a 5 volt line running through the red. This power supply can easily be converted by literally taking one section of this and connecting to, oops, sorry for the camera jiggle there, This power supply can easily be converted into a added to a 4-pin connector that can sit on top here, which can be zip tied down, and you can make screw connections, and that'll be the next step. Alright, so I wanted to bring one of these out to show you exactly what this is. This here is what's called a European style bus bar or wire connector, and you'll notice that it has a bunch of screws inside, and what that allows us to do is on one side insert a wire and screw it down, and then we're able to make a solid connection through this by connecting another wire to this side and screwing it down using the screw terminals. And what I've done is I've taken one of these already and I actually trimmed it down. I'm only going to use a 5-volt line and a 12-volt line from this power supply over here, and I'm going to use 2 ground wires in case I should happen to need a little bit of power from both the 5-volt and the 12-volt. Cutting off this 4-pin Molex connector right here. I'm going to grab my wire cutters and I am going to make the cut. And I do not need this anymore. Next step is I need to strip these wires. And there. That didn't take very long. The next step would be to make these connections into the terminals, and I will pause the video, and when I come back these will be all connected up. Okay, and we're back, and that didn't take very long, but as you can see I've selected 2 black wires to be my neutral or my ground, and I selected the yellow wire here, it's my 12-volt, and I have my 5-volt line right here. Now we can bring our power supply back in. I can reach down and feel the fan is blowing, and I can come in here and I can simply touch into these terminals, and if I look at my power supply, I can see that my 5-volt line is running at 5.2 volts, 5.1 volts, and then I can test my 12-volt line. It's running at 11.7 volts. And since every power supply, computer power supply, comes with a maximum voltage usage amount, I can calculate using how much the load is for my RGBs or pixels, and I can figure out how much this power supply can run without blowing it up or wearing it out or something. But this power supply is definitely a good little candidate for being used in any of my future projects. So there was a quick video. I hope if you have any questions, leave them below. Thanks.